Gentlemen, I hope my mic is on. Yeah, it's on, thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the night after Halloween. I've seen a few hungover faces in the lobby, as well as two of our guests that had sleepy faces because of the early morning flights they had to take to get here. One of these guests is here actually in the upcoming panel, Ramon Amaro. Thank you for suffering for the arts. The session we're about to start now is the first session in the temporal lens of the future. The festival, as well as the three sub-themes that we're dealing with, have been neatly divided into three lenses. On Friday we dealt with the past, yesterday we dealt with the present, and today it's time to have a look at the future. Our early afternoon sessions all have dealt with big data. But we try to avoid the term big data because of its connotations and limitations, so the sessions are called colossal data. Our moderator for this session is Pim Verlaak. He calls himself a digital enthusiast, has been a curator for, amongst others, the 2011 Impakt Festival, The Right to Know. He will further introduce the guests of tonight's panel, this afternoon's panel, sorry. Rutger Rienks, Ramon Amaro, Rieger and Egge van der Poel. Please give them a warm applause.
Hey, welcome. Today the title of this session will be Cloudy Forecast. So the topic will be predictive policing, business intelligence, machine learning, and what can happen when governments use it, for instance in the police force or healthcare, what the pros are, what the cons are, what the risks are and what the opportunities are. And we have a range of speakers that come from completely different backgrounds. And just to kick off with the first one, Rutger Rienks. He is head of one of the heads of business intelligence at the Dutch National Police Force. Also involved in predictive policing projects. So please give the floor a warm welcome, Rutger Rienks.
Well, thank you all. I prepared a presentation for you, so I think it's good to start with that. So I need to set up the presentation. Can we get it on the screen? Excellent. So thanks for the invitation. I wrote a little book on predictive policing. And predictive policing is an interesting topic because it has a lot of ethical dilemmas as well involved. There are many people in favor of predictive policing, like me, for instance, but there are also people hesitating or hesitant because, the randomization of the police force, as we know it nowadays, might, disappear. So if we talk about predictive policing, we want to predict where crime might occur, for instance. We might to look into the future, and what we do to look into the future is to gather pieces of a puzzle that create a clear picture. And you can see that here on this picture, or in this dia. I don't know if you are around in the Netherlands already for longer than this festival, but the topic of predictive policing has won the prize of the Bits of Freedom Award, the Big Brother Award, 3 days ago. And this shows that it's good to think about the topic, right? And not just do things with it, implement it, and don't care what's happening at all, because there are cons as well, and you have to be really careful when you're implementing technology like this, right? There's a fear for machines and for Big Brother on one hand, and on the other hand, we hope as a society for a reliable and modern police to keep things safe. But as a matter of fact, when we look into the public debate here, yesterday's article in the Dutch Volkskrant, or it's a national newspaper, an article appeared on a new app that was launched, and police officers could use that in their everyday operations, their everyday practice. And although, from my point of view, it was a fantastic application, the article only stressed out that it gave the police access to data from the public, that was entered and given to the police by the people themselves. So, and of course, as a police, you need to act on the data that is provided by the public, right? So the debate here is really interesting in a way that you need to know what is behind it before you can actually create an opinion about things, I guess. So, I listed some questions to start the thought about this. We already have opponents when we speak of a government. Some people don't want a government, right? Others don't want a police organization. Some are hesitant when you speak of an efficient police organization. Yeah, you don't want it to be efficient. No, it needs to be there. But when we have technology in place that tells the police that once they move out of the building, they should go right instead of left, take a left instead of a right, people start to get hesitant. If we add data to improve that efficiency, people start to be more hesitant, so there starts to be a balance that is appearing. And a funny thing about this is that, technology brings about new opportunities, new possibilities, right? On one hand, but on the other hand, it has never been different. I mean, from the early days, when we were hunters and collectors, we have been looking for technology in order to improve the way we live and the way we do things. So this is an instance, a picture taken from the inauguration of the Pope in 2005. And this is the one in 2013. You might have noticed something like this. So this shows about technological progress, right? And people start to bring up pictures that society gets boring because we are all applying technology. We start talking, we don't talk to each other anymore. But if you go back to 1965, you see the subway wasn't really that much different. So common sense needs to be applied here as well, right? And not the idea that, technology is something we should be afraid of or stay away from. Just as a start for our discussion later. Okay, let's go to the prediction part, right? If we create predictions, we are becoming increasingly better because we can see more of those pieces that create a clearer picture. But predictions have been very old as well. Back in the early days, in the Greek times, for instance, there was the Delphi's oracle where you could go to and have your future predicted. And that has changed, luckily. But the fortune tellers, for instance, that you can see at the right top, are still there. And people are very good in predicting the weather, for instance. They're increasingly becoming better in predicting soccer. And also stock markets, of course, is a very interesting topic. But what is at hand here, right? If you start to create predictions, some things are more easy than others. Why are we good in predicting the weather and not that good yet in predicting criminal behavior or the stock market? Just a short test for you guys. What will be the next mark here? Let's test the intelligence of our audience. 7 or 8, I hear. Well, my thought was 8. 7 could have been possibly as well. But for this one, if you see 1, 2, 3, then what? 5, 4 was mentioned. 6, 4 or 5 I was coming up with. But what makes me think of the next mark, right? That is an intriguing question. Is it the sum of the last 2 digits? Or is there a pattern underneath? Or should I do something different? Well, if you want to make good predictions, it's always nice if there is a pattern underneath, right? For instance, you can predict that your heart keeps on pulsing, right? Or that you go to sleep this evening, if you don't have to catch your next flight. But you can also very precise calculate the number of rabbits that live in Australia, for instance, and they will increase their numbers if we don't do something about it, and they increase more and more rapidly. So there's a pattern that describes the growth of the rabbit population, for instance, and if we are aware of that pattern, we can make our predictions very reliable. So, coming back to the topic of predictive policing, the good thing about crime is that there are also theories describing patterns about it. There are 3 of them listed here. There are more, and we can apply these theories in our algorithms that create predictions. There's always, for instance, a risk involved for an offender who's willing to commit a crime, and if the reward is higher than the risk, he is more likely to commit the crime than if the reward is less high than the risk. Well, there are more complex theories involved, and given these expectations that we can create, we might act as a police organization in order to improve our work. And that is not something new, right? We are doing that for many, many years. For instance, if there are demonstrations out there, there are people willing to have a festival in Utrecht, for instance. Well, then there are some guys thinking about it inside the police office, and, well, what will be the risks involved, and should we act on it? Should we put officers in front of the door, or should we take other security measurements? For a demonstration, for instance, some fences might be put up, or whatever other measures can be thought of. For our Royal Dutch House to the right, we are also protecting them, and the way we are protecting them, well, it goes in a similar way. They have their agendas, and given their agendas and their expected behavior and encounters in a day, we adopt or adapt to that situation, and we try to level out the risks there as well. But what else can be predicted? If you have a criminal encounter, for instance, between 2 criminals, it would be very nice if we know in advance where they will meet. So if they move closer to each other, it would be good to see if we can be there where they meet before they are there, right? Then we can see them and maybe even get them red-handed. But that's just one application domain. There are many others, and I'll show some of them here. For instance, if a burglar is arrested and the hearing is going on, then the detective or the police officer that is interrogating the person, he's also in his head, thinking about, well, what might be the response if I ask this question, no? And what might be his response if I ask another question. So there are also expectations involved, and the behavior here can be influenced given on this expectation as well. So we can learn from this process in order to optimize our interrogations, for instance. Well, then this is a bit theory from law. That in Dutch criminal law, there's an interesting articles 27, which allows basically an officer to act or not to act, given the circumstances he encounters and whether he thinks that a situation is suspicious in a way that he is certain enough that there is a suspect that he can get. And getting a suspect is, well, that is something that you can not do without a suspicion, of course. But the interesting thing here is what creates that suspicion. And the law says something about it, that given facts and circumstances, a reasonable suspicion of guilt in committing a punishable offense should be there. And, well, these facts and circumstances are actually those pieces of the puzzle that create a picture, right? And what might happen here is, well, that the image, for instance, was not clear enough, that the puzzle actually reveals something else when it is finished. So one should be very careful here that when one gets a criminal, to ascertain that he really is a criminal, right? And here we introduce, of course, the world of false positives, true positives, false negatives, and true negatives. I don't know if you were aware of those, but I won't go into depth of that. But one could ask questions like, is it luck, or is it a pattern that the policeman encounters a criminal here? And what makes he think that the person that he encounters actually is committing an offense? Is it his own knowledge here, or does he see it happening, that he's really sure about it, or is he generalizing from previous encounters? And then there's this, well, the balance between yes and no, right? Yes, he's sure, no, he's not sure. And in the meantime, there is something what we can call a reasonable suspicion. And if that suspicion is reasonable enough, he's able to act. At least get the criminal and put him behind bars. Well, then there's also something what we call in the Netherlands serious objections or so. I don't know how to translate it in English, exactly in the judicial terms, but then we have a little more certainty on the yes side. But let's assume a criminal offense like the growth of hemp, for instance, like the marijuana case. The preparation of hemp growth in the Netherlands is a punishable offense, so you're not allowed to do that. But what are these preparation acts? Interesting question, right? So if we look at the process of growing marijuana or hemp, don't do it at home, but it starts usually with obtaining a location, preparing a location, buying material, growth, harvesting, etc. And then we might already start to notice something about that process going on, right? Someone is obtaining a location. If someone is obtaining a location, is he already committing the crime of preparation acts of growing hemp here? Is the question. What do we see? I'm just obtaining a location. Am I preparing hemp? No, maybe not, right? But what if we add a little data? If we know that he's obtaining a location where there's a lot of arousal going on in the streets, and there's drug trafficking or drug abuse, and if the buyer also has a low income, is he committing a crime here already if he is obtaining a location? No, not yet. Okay, then he buys, then the location becomes his, right? And then we see the things moving into the location. Wires are moved in, lamps, with other carbon filters, growth tents maybe even. Are we already sufficiently confident here that he's committing a crime, or that a criminal organization is committing a crime here? Yeah, I see some more doubts here already. We see plants going in, wrinklers, you know. What I try to stress out here is that you are increasingly becoming more confident that this fact is actually happening. But you can't be sure, right, if you're just seeing a person without any income buying a location. He might even grow paprikas or tomatoes in his house. You don't know it in the first place. So our national experts tells us that if he see a type of ventilation being carried into a house, that he's sufficiently sure and he's acting. So that is some sort of an internal threshold here. But well, of course, if there's snow, if it's snowy outside, and we see that the roofs are warm, for instance, then we are again much more confident of things going on. But this threshold here is an interesting and intriguing balance also, because if we are wrong and get someone who does not appear to be a criminal, well, that's not what we want, right? We want to be a police force that is your best friend in the Netherlands, and not someone that opposes you or is your enemy or whatever. So then the question, of course, can be asked, what is the best predictor here if we think of the hemp case? And, well, there are many criminologists that have been studying criminal behavior, and people thought in the beginning that you could even given the measurements of someone's skull, predict if someone is a criminal or not. Well, that's complete nonsense, of course. I can't stress out that more louder. But on the other hand, if you look at some statistics, one can see, for instance, that the more hours you spend on a study, that your grades go up. So there seems to be some sort of, well, linear thing going on, that the more points you have, it's also more likely that you spend more hours on it. So can we continue this train of thought, or should we be careful here? Let's look at this picture. We have here on the right type, we have a certain spread of a disease called mazelen in the Netherlands. And on the left, we have the percentage of voters on a particular political party. In this case, the SGP, which is a really well, fundamental and Christian party. So it seems that there is some analogy here. But is there also a causal relationship? I don't know. You know, it might appear that way, but we should be careful when we look at these sorts of pictures, of course. And to stress that out more clearly, I took some other examples from Wikipedia, and we see here the perfect well, lines with an excellent inverse correlation between the honey-producing bee colonies in the United States put out against the juvenile arrest for the possession of marijuana. So if we put out these two against each other, it might seem that they have something to do with each other, but of course it's complete nonsense, right? That also goes for the bottom one. It is the number of murders committed by steam and hot vapors and hot objects in the red against the age of Miss America. So if we predict the number of murders in 2010, then can we look at the age of Miss America in 2010 in order to... No, of course not, right? So one should be very aware of these things when dealing with data in order to make predictions. And we are becoming actually good at predicting some things, like predicting the Oscar. You can see that predicting the Oscar for the best actress was quite hard, but we can increasingly do it better because we're adding more and more knowledge here. And we know which pieces of the puzzle to gather in order to optimize our predictions. So here are some of those variables that are taken into account when one tries to make a prediction like this. So if the best director is also, if it has a nomination, then for best motion picture, it's more likely to get an Oscar as well. Might even sound as common knowledge, but before one knows that these attributes or features can be applied here, one should study the phenomena beforehand very, very carefully. And then for policing again, well, one might know this game. It's a game for children, right? It's a Cluedo sort of game. Like, who is the burglar? And if we look at some of those attributes from people, we already might think of something that, well, if one is a judge, for instance, it's less likely that he's a criminal. So we might subtract some points here. But if someone is divorced, it's probably more likely that he's becoming a burglar or a criminal, right? What do we think of this way of reasoning? Is that appropriate, or should we act like this? Doesn't make any sense, yeah? Some, maybe. Well, look at some basic examples that we learned from machine learning theory, for instance. If we decide on going out to play tennis, we might just collect some samples and look at some variables concerning the weather. So on day one, we have a sunny outlook and a hot temperature, and we decide not to go out and play tennis. And we collect that for 14 days. And given these 14 samples and these values in this table, we can create actually a decision tree, or a beslissboom in Dutch, which actually holds the knowledge that resides within this data. So, given this tree, it says if the outlook is overcasted, then yes, we go out to play tennis, because all these samples here show that, well, if it is overcast, we play tennis. If there is overcast, we play tennis. Yes, yes. So it's actually learning given samples from your data that we collected. So this might seem a good idea, right? But the thing here is that we just sampled 14 times, and only our theoretical space alone contains 108 solutions. And we didn't sample like 10,000 times, or I don't know how many times we should sample before it's sufficiently reasonable to rely on a knowledge tree like this. So we can craft several rules containing knowledge that actually help you on your decisions, whether you act or not. So this one we noticed, right? We play tennis if the weather is sunny and the tennis court is unoccupied, for instance, just to stress out the idea. But we might run after a car if it's worth more than 50,000 euros or dollars, if the owner is less than 35 years and he has a very low income. Is that an interesting car for us then? What does your feeling tell you? Yes, I see, yes. I have 2 minutes, oh damn. A rich father, yeah, could very well be. It might be a famous soccer player as well, right? So, in general, one could say yes, but there might be examples where it is not the case. So there are true positives here, but also false positives. And again, these false positives should be very highly looked after. And there might also be other cases at hand, right? We can also play tennis indoors. So our knowledge that we collected might not be sufficient. It might just be on a part of the domain rather than a full domain. Well, this type of knowledge building and taxation of risks, what we can do that for very many things. I stressed out the idea for people, but you can also do it for criminal networks, for tweets on Twitter, for whatever topic basically you're interested in. And well, for me as a police officer, of course, I'm more interested in criminal behavior, but well, you know that people from other companies might have more interested in well, advertisement or optimizing their own processes, especially in healthcare, for instance, which we'll go into depth more later. So it provides us focus for what I stressed. We're able to determine whether we go left instead of right when we move out of our police department, and that helps us in optimizing our police force. There is scarcity, of course. We only have 6 helicopters. I'll finish with this example in the Netherlands, and we bought 6 helicopters. Given the fact that, well, they can fly about this far, so, and get back, and then they're home again. So we have one circle that can be covered with 1 helicopter. So, and 6 of those helicopters cover the Netherlands. So we buy 6. And what happened next was we put them all in Amsterdam. Yeah? So that's not efficient, and that's not how you want to do it. So luckily it goes completely in a different manner now, and we can even calculate the most optimal routes for those helicopters, given the crime patterns that occurred for the period, I think the last 3 or 5 years beneath it. So we want that the helicopter is used there, where it can add value. And that is, again, also an expectation, which we cannot validate beforehand. But, well, we thought it might be worth the risk to fly there rather than, well, above the Sinai, for instance. So there are many new words also involved here. And these might frighten you, right? Because you might be unfamiliar with it. But then get used to it, I would say. Because it's just a part of the evolution process. And if you don't want to learn or to work with these new ways of doing things or these new technologies, yeah, it's up to you. I mean, criminals are using the newest technology as well. So we as a police force, we cannot hesitate in doing so too. So that concludes my talk. I wrote a little book. There's some free examples here, and you can download it from the internet as well. So feel free to contact me and ask questions later in the panel also, right? Yes. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks again. Any questions from the audience already? We can take one or two for now. Yeah? Anna?
I was wondering about the example from the police helicopters. So you said at one point they all ended up in Amsterdam, which I'm very aware of. But I was wondering to what extent also the technology reinforces the numbers. So you, for example, you have particular crime numbers, and that's what you base also the location of the helicopters on, because you want to cover the area where there's crime. But then, of course, if you send in technology such as helicopters, then of course you have a higher chance of maybe catching criminals than you wouldn't without the technology. So to what extent do you then reinforce the numbers you're also creating? So what happens then to maybe, aren't you creating gaps, or aren't you reinforcing more criminal areas than others just because you're putting the technology there?
Several things might happen, right? Because you improve the way you act, but that also has an effect on the crime that happens below, literally. So we should start by measuring what is going on. We actually should have started the measurements already before, so we can even detect the difference, right? Is crime reducing or not? And if it is increasing, well, we might need more helicopters, and if it's decreasing, we might need less. That's of course a trade-off there.
And my main point, it might be increasing because you're adding technology to measure it. So it's kind of like an artificial effect of the technology, maybe.
Yeah. If you start measuring, it might. If you're looking at something, you might even see it. And if you, it's like what the famous Dutch soccerman Johan Cruyff said, like you can only recognize it if you know what it is, right? So yeah, absolutely.
Just one small question for me. When hearing about those suspicion processes, and okay, there's a pattern, and probably there's a more, for instance, the hemp example that you gave.
Yeah.
What I'm wondering is, for hemp, it sounds really obvious, but for a lot of crimes, it's perhaps less obvious. And how is the sort of typical story created that leads to a certain pattern or algorithm to detect something? Because I can imagine you have to go through years of jurisdiction or police files to see a proper pattern in certain crimes.
Yeah.
Can you perhaps tell a bit about it, short version?
Yes, of course. Look, there are certain crime types that hardly occur, so it's very hard to build models or induce knowledge from them. But for burglaries, for instance, there are many examples, and we can learn a lot from them. So if we can build models, and we actually did, that is able to predict where the areas are that are more likely to be infected by burglaries, then well, we can adapt to that. So well, you need to apply your assets there where you can expect also to achieve some goals. And it's better to apply it there where you have many cell samples and where you can gain a reward, rather than where there are few samples and the chances of success are fewer.
Yeah. Okay, check. There will be a longer Q&A in the end, so let's keep it short now. And thanks again.
All right.
Our next guest, Ramon Amaro, is associated with Goldsmiths, and he teaches critical computational theory there. For now, he's a hands-on man, so he also works with big data, but he's also a theorist, so that's an interesting combination. For this talk, he will talk about the history of predictive analytics and some more. So please, a warm welcome, Ramon Amaro.
Can you hear me okay with this? Is this on okay? Okay, that's fine. I'm just going to take a moment to reset the presentation, if you will. Ignore that. Don't look at that. Thank you for the introduction. Again, my name is Ramon Amaro, and I'm an associate lecturer at Goldsmiths University of London, and also do some editing work for the open access journal, Big Data and Society. Mainly what I wanted to talk to you about today, and have a very brief amount of time to do, is something is somewhat of an extension of the presentation that we just saw. And really what I want to highlight is that there's a very long genealogy, there's a very long history of Western societies using predictive analytics and using data to predict social behaviors. And it's an interesting moment that we're in right now, especially with the proliferation of technology that allows us to mine massive amounts of data that makes these logics seem as if they're new. It makes them seem fresh, as if we now have the technology, we now have the tools to pattern social behavior. But these logics actually started about 400 years ago, and we're still sort of working within those logics. Along those lines, it's been claimed widely, both in academia and industry circles, that we're in this age of big data, or colossal data, as we say today. More so, we're told that the unprecedented aggregations of data are symbolic of some type of new revolution, one that enables us to view culture and social behavior in new ways that can reveal the secrets to human progress. And we just saw like a really great example of that. It is thought that these data, in their capacity to pattern, predict, and disclose, are agents themselves. They're sort of like storage devices for vocal boxes of real human intent, and the precursors of hidden desires that human agents have yet to realize we possess. These data and the technologies that make use of them have contributed to a wide range of applications that have been beneficial to society, such as policing, helping us gather intelligences about our surroundings with precision that would not have been possible even a decade ago. However, these technologies, although fascinating in their abilities, emerge from a long and often tense history between data collection by official agencies such as policing agencies and the idea of free citizenship. In other words, although our technologies are new in the way that they use data to predict futures and influence the present, they share a common history with Western society's desire to use data to know the unknowable by ordering random and chaotic events and information. So what I want to do briefly is I want to take you through the histories, beginning with the 17th century Prussian Empire, onto our present relationship with data. And in the end, if I still have your patience, I'll discuss what these histories mean in terms of data ethics, and in fitting with the theme of today's conference of our future in a datafied society. But before I begin to do that, I need to sort of define the field of ethics that I'm working with. In here, I specifically point towards data discrimination and algorithmic prejudices that within the computation and statistical logics of data analysis and machine learning place immediate ethical concerns out of view in favor of celebratory tones of machine performance. And basically what I mean by that is I'm dealing with ethical considerations that get hidden in the process as we celebrate the idea of how well these technologies work. The Open Technology Institute defines data discrimination as the process of algorithmically driven decision-making and their connection to injustice and unfairness in society. Since algorithms are code that instruct computers to perform in certain capacities, and as we just saw, data are discrete elements of our identity as representatives of the real world, then I believe it's safe to say that discrimination in this new age of data is the process by which data is continually instructed to drive unfairness into the cultural landscape. In other words, what is articulated through data are mechanisms of power, and the real threat of this power is that algorithmic decision-making will disproportionately burden the most marginalized in society by preferencing certain individuals over others. Here, I'm particularly drawn to Randall Bartlett's definition of power. And that definition is somewhat complicated, but actually very simple underneath. And he says that that power is defined as the ability of one actor to alter the decisions made and or welfare experienced by another actor relative to the choices that would have been made or the welfare achieved that would have been experienced had the first actor not existed. Right? So that was a very good example actually with the question of the helicopter. So that's what I'm saying, a position of power is how would the actor on the street act if the helicopter wasn't there. So the helicopter coming into the neighborhood actually changes the dynamic of power that's initiated through data. And what I'm concerned with is when individual values are measured by the use of any associative classifications of data, then data serves not as just representatives of the real world, but they're sort of conduits of power. And it's not significant to think about why individuals behave in the way that they do, why data is captured in the way that it is, what data is analyzed, or whether the data is volunteered or suspiciously mined. As long as the data maintains a direct influence on any social or political responses to a given individual, then data is in accord with mechanisms of power. And what's really happened is data hasn't become a new mode of prediction. Data has just been a new mode of transmission of power. And I'll talk to you about that, and that's why I want to go to the historical circumstance. I think it's particularly important to, especially given the theme of this event, we really need to look at our histories to understand our futures. And the danger with deep data mining and the danger with machine learning and algorithmic processes is we're foreclosing the lessons that we've learned in the past in favor of a new fancy type of technology. That doesn't mean I'm anti-technology. Actually, I love it. I'm an engineer, so I'm I'm very geeky when it comes to those things, and I like to play with them. But in the same sense, we have to start recognizing who we're leaving behind when we're using these mechanisms. So basically, what I want to start with is the 17th century. I know it sounds weird, right? Don't go to sleep. I won't stay there long. And the reason why I'm going there is in the 17th century was largely made, statistics and data gathering in the 17th century was largely made within an amateur interest in small statistical tables. So basically you just had random people just going around and collecting statistical data. And they started to develop what they called early life tables, and they were mostly derived from no specific aim other than collection of birth records, death, and marriages. They were primarily kept in stasis for private research purposes or for consultations sometimes with monarchs and government administrators. This would not ignore sort of the increased public interest in numbers informed by advances in scientific measuring techniques. Now keep in mind that as these amateur statisticians are going around, this is the same time as Isaac Newton, so on and so forth, are dealing with astronomy, geography, optics, music, mechanics. Basically the world is obsessed with capturing data. What's particularly interesting here is the etymology of statistical society is kind of illustrative to me, and I find it very interesting that most people may not know this, but the word statistics actually comes from the same root word as state. So it sort of reflects the origin of statistics already as a process of data collection for administrative purposes. And by the late 17th century, European states had already started collecting survey and census information on their colonies and other possessions to facilitate resource extraction. And although each territory handled its own data collection for different reasons, of importance is the exponential increase in data aggregation as a method for understanding population phenomena. Whereas early data surveys were collections for, just as I mentioned, amateur exploration, the institutionalization of this data by early aggregators, namely A.C. Crombie, some of you math nerds may know Leibniz, and others, brought forth an increased interest in measurement and statistics and correlating the biological with mathematics. Leibniz's prolific summaries of data aggregation of culture phenomenon are very significant, as well as his advancements in calculus. Basically, this is the founder of calculus, the class we all hated when we were in school, right? And And really what's significant about that is it gave particular insight into the political and intellectual climate in the 17th century. And Leibniz's true vision didn't get implemented until the 20th century. And this is particularly telling, because for Leibniz, the true measure of state power was in its population. And it's interesting, especially these days, as we discuss things such as migration, refugee crises, we study nationalities and such borders, that in the 17th century, these conversations start to emerge as what is the power of the state, and that power was determined by statistically gathering data on the population. And Leibniz sort of formulated this really good idea, well, he thought it was a good idea, of a centralized statistics office in Prussia around 1685. And what he envisioned is that this one office would serve several interests of the state. This one office would handle military issues, civil issues, mining issues, forestry, police, every administrative function. And the central office will also keep records of births and deaths, and thus be able to accurately estimate populations and, of course, therefore, power of the state. Now, these conceptualizations were not actualized until much later, but Leibniz's interest in statistical measures did develop into a 56-category evaluation of state populations, including the number of people by sex, social status, age distribution, life expectancy, and pretty much every life event you can imagine. And what I want to show you just briefly here, this is one of the early tables here. I'm not sure if you can see it. It's a handwritten table. Actually, sorry, I have a handwritten one coming up. It's a pretty old table, but it sort of gives you a snapshot of the type of data that was collected. Of course, you can't read this, but if we just sort of focus on the columns, and this will make sense a little bit later. Here's another example. This is a registry of married couples according to their age and status in different Prussian districts. Next up, we have a register of deceased by age and year in different Prussian districts. And the reason I have this order, if you can see sort of the nuance of privacy, right? The correlations that are starting to happen between marriage and age and location. We're starting to correlate statistically what's happening with the Prussian population. The next register we have is deceased according to the seasons. So how many people died in summer or fall or winter, so on and so forth. And this is a table from 1789. Now, these charts signal the importance of understanding Leibniz's concept and its capability to associate the growth of a population with statistical value. Although data centralize fields of relation into generalized aggregates, basically, as data brought people together, they also reinforce conditions of nationality and belonging through classification. Whereas prior to the use of statistics, nationality was determined by geographical location, data analysis instead allowed for national designations based on data with the statistical associations. This is no better illustrated than contemporary practices that assign birth and death records to national numbers, which are then centralized and correlated with government interests, including taxation and, in this case, policing. So, in a way, given that great example about where the 6 helicopters have been positioned, so in essence, what the National Police Department has done is rezoned people into 6 districts without their knowledge of being rezoned. So their correlation of relationships in that district, they may not even know that they're in this district, but all of a sudden their correlation and associations within that district to an outside black box agency is now significant and can significantly reduce their life chances. And I'll talk more about that really soon. These data, they create national profiles that, unlike earlier practices, do not require the individual to be present and accounted for. And I think that's what my colleague here was being, he didn't touch on it much, but I could feel the undertone of that sort of type of heuristic policing. Like you bring in that expert who has a long history of evaluating sort of drug houses. He knows, he has this sort of feeling and an intuition and knows when certain equipment goes certain places, when certain behaviors or this or that. The issue we're dealing with now with machine learning and big data is that heuristic approach is being replaced by a certainty of mathematics. And underneath those logics of mathematics, we know there is no certainty. Just like we said, there's no causality. Correlation doesn't mean causality. So instead, like statistical citizenship, it sort of leaves a trail of behavior aggregated onto tables and today databases for future use in forecasting certain relationships between mobility and state-determined best practices. So I keep picking on you. I feel bad. Here we go, but we'll get discussion later. But we see how the drug house has emerged. The actual offender doesn't have to be there. The activity is actually going on in a virtual data space and no longer requires the suspect to be there. And the suspect is actually criminalized prior to the suspect even realizing he's being surveyed. So now it's up to the suspect to circumvent his due process and prove that the analytics that were gathered on the suspect wasn't him. So maybe it's a cousin that came and lived at your house. And what this fine gentleman is basically saying is, he's saying it's not perfect because you have to wait. You have to determine, is this the cousin? Is this guy really doing it? Is he trying to grow tomatoes and he watched the wrong YouTube video? You know, he doesn't, you don't really know. And they're very highly skilled, specialized officers who have a lot of very good experience with these types of things. And they can know the difference between, you know, hash and a tomato. Some don't, but most do, right? But when we start initiating analytics and data, those processes get circumvented, and that's sort of what I'm talking about here. And I'm going to show you a few more tables in a second. But what's really important, too, is from Leibniz's thing, is the emergence of social profiles simultaneously inform ideas of secrecy, in that the power of the state could be directly related to the number of able bodies counted. So basically what started to happen in the Prussian Empire is they figured something out, because at this point the state of the power is determined by the number of soldiers. The number of soldiers is gendered, which is, you know, male, right? That's why they need birth records. So they need to know how many males have been born in certain territories on certain fronts, and now they can assess how powerful the state is in terms of army. Well, Leibniz had a very brilliant idea, and he said, wait a minute, if we know how many males we have, what's stopping another territory from coming into our territory and counting too? That was the birth of the black box. State secrets of data. And as you see, especially with predictive analytics, the one thing that's missing from the predictive analytic equation is the actual analytics and the actual data. The data is captured either actively or passively, is processed through an algorithm, which I'll show you, and it spits out a pattern or an outcome, and then it's up to the suspect to prove that he's not in that pattern and outcome, but the suspect is actually never given privy to the actual algorithm or the data that was captured on the subject. And I didn't take much political science in my many degrees, but I think that's a circumvention of due process. He's going to say a lot to say on this. I know it. I'm going to get killed later. So what do these phenomenon have to do with today? I'm going to so as the quantification of natural phenomenon extended into the prediction of mortality, it also generated statistical records and prediction on criminality, namely in early suicide tables in London, actually. Suicide was considered not only a mental disorder, but also a crime. So the first aggregation of data and prediction was predicting how many suicides there would be in London. And at a certain point in the 18th century, there was a competition between London and Paris. Yeah, it's still going on. To figure out which one had the most amount of criminals and which ones were insane. And that was done by statistical methods of suicide tables. And this is one of those tables as causality of death. And I'm not sure if you can read that, but these deaths are listed everything from stillborn to fever to died suddenly to was scalded to a cough. And suicide tables are on there as well. So basically what this means is this developed into a weekly bill of mortality in London. And it created formal systems to predict the onset and spread of not only death, but causes of death. Because what I could do statistically is I could do this right now. I can take all of these numbers and my chart goes up to 1631. I can predict 1632, 1633, 1634. So I can abstract all of those forms of data into a future prediction. And that's what makes the analytics so powerful. I mean, this system was never fully realized by its initiator, John Graunt. But later work by William Petty's political arithmetic developed into statistically based population estimates, namely for life insurance at this point. I have 2 minutes. Okay, all right. I don't really have time to talk to you about the rest of this, so I'm gonna flip through the slides really quickly. What I want to show you is a typical machine learning process. I don't have a pointer here. Can I use the pointer? Okay. All right. I'm going to turn this around here so we can see it. Okay, this is how machine learning works. I deal with neural networks, and this is a very simple neural network here. Neural networks right now run everything from your Facebook newsfeed to most Google mining. Also will power the predictive power of drones, and it also plays a key role in predictive policing algorithms. So basically, you take prior information. That information is turned into data. It's also compressed into numbers, so we can see the sort of life tables. I died by cough, and that turns into a number of data. You apply mathematical theory, and in machine learning is namely statistics and linear algebra. That goes into this thing we call data mining, which we've all heard. That input data is put into an artificial neural network. This is in case of deep mining and neural networks. There are many different techniques to do this. This data is fed into the network as inputs. This input goes into sort of hidden layers of computation. I don't have time to go into this, but it spits out a pattern. The problem with this pattern is, as the young lady pointed out earlier, is this pattern already pre-contains the data discrimination algorithm, the prejudice, that is fed back into the conception of the data that we have. One good example is, and I'll skip forward here. This is a typical crime-to-crime similarity learning algorithm, in case you want to see one. And what's important is not necessarily the abstraction of the algorithm itself, because it's pretty complicated. But really what I want to point out is this. This is the training data that you would feed a typical algorithm like that, which looks very similar to the statistical tables that were gathered in the 17th century used for prediction. And really what I want to highlight is what you would do with that particular training data is you would gather a certain table, some table similar to what we've seen before. But what's particularly interesting, especially in my area of ethics, is we see part of that table is the suspect's race. Also the suspect's gender. So really what we're talking about is prior to the analytics actually even happening, it's already been gendered and it's already been racialized by the input that goes in here. So it's very easy to create an echo chamber, and actually the comment you made is actually what we call an echo chamber. And what's a good case study would be in Lewisham in southeast London, actually where I live, our heavy stop and search mechanisms. And when you look at the data, what's interesting about the data is there are twice as many young black males that are stopped for stop and search as there are non-black males. Now, what's interesting about the category I just listed is the London police only has 3 categories of race: black, white, and other. And those are hand-coded. I happen to know that black is C3. I don't know, I know that. And those are hand-coded into the analytics that go here. Now, what's interesting, though, is if you look at the actual data, so we have twice as many young black males being stopped in search as non-young black males. However, if you look at the data, if you actually stop twice as many non-young black males, you would have twice as many arrests. So it actually has created an echo, the fact that you have stopped one particular type of individual, and this could extend to race, it could extend to sexuality, many other things. The fact that you have one type of individual that gets coded into a pattern in analytics reinforces the idea that that individual is something to look at, which reinforces the idea that predictive policing needs to happen in that particular area with those types of individuals. And as those individuals, it's the same idea as the helicopter. So we now watch a particular individual, whether it be redheads or females of this certain age. But since you're actually watching them, you create more criminality in them, which reinforces your algorithm right back again. So I'm going to sort of cut through the chase here. I have a lot of fine graphs I'll show you later about how neural networks work for pattern recognition, but I don't have time to go into those now. This is a typical chart of facial recognition on how drones and other CCTV cameras start to extrapolate your facial characteristics based on certain numbers and certain weights in you. Yeah, that was pretty rushed. I'm pretty much out of time, so maybe I'll save a second for questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, that would be great.
It's okay. All right.
So, please, well, thank you.
I'll just write that there. Okay.
Since we're short on time, ideally just one question from the audience, and then in the panel afterwards we'll go deeper into it. So, is there one question, and otherwise we just continue? Must be one question.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
None. One there.
Thank you for your very interesting talk. The question I have, I'll be one of the later speakers. I will talk a little bit about healthcare. In epidemiology, what you refer to could be considered measurement bias, selection bias. In epidemiology, you can correct for that.
That's kind of a common myth. You can correct for it, but I think we need to be careful with the word correct because
Exactly.
there's
That's
statistical.
How to do it then.
Right, there's statistical methods that reduce error. Bayesian. It's a long list of statistical methods. That's why I start with statistics, because basically what you do is you start to the error. Statistically and mathematically, you can reduce the error, and the larger the population is, the more that you can reduce this type of error. And you have outliers that's sort of laying on this curve. There was a normalized curve that comes down. So we have to be careful with the idea of correct, because you're not necessarily correcting, you're reducing. In actuality, what you're doing is you're reducing a large amount of data with random and chaotic occurrences. You're reducing them to mathematical theories that themselves are based on reduction, and you're reducing those into a pattern. And the thing that's particularly interesting is that now this is not circumstantial for something like Facebook feed or image tagging, but when you're talking about something like health or something that can affect someone's life chances like policing, do you really want to take the chance that you have a false positive? Even though statistically it says it's not likely to happen. I mean, they're very key several examples of outliers that have already sort of revealed themselves to sort of inconsequential circumstances like, Google search, so on and so forth. But when we're dealing with someone's life chances like healthcare, it's not good enough to sort of rely on the idea that we can statistically reduce contingency. And really the underlying point of me starting 400 years ago was to prove that we have a common idea in our society that if we just have enough data, if we just have enough, give me more, and then I can predict, and I can predict with certainty. But what we've seen over the last 400 years is we're no closer to prediction than we were 400 years ago. But what's changed now is we have a different logic of prediction. And we have this idea that certainty is just around the corner. All we need to do is just collect a little bit more data and find it. But I highly doubt when it comes to sort of very subjective and very personal types of spaces that we want to leave someone behind. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thanks. This is actually an excellent bridge for the next speaker. So thanks again, Ramon Amaro. And welcome, Frank Rieger. I said that this is an excellent bridge because he will talk about the perhaps big data bubble that we're in. Frank Rieger is a spokesperson for the KS Computer Club based in Berlin and has been an expert in the field of security for almost 20 years. Has a side job as a CTO. So he will, I'll leave the floor to him. Thanks.
Test. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the invitation. This whole subject of big data and algorithms that we are basing our society more and more on is something that I've been working on for quite a number of years. The CCC, as you know, is an hacker organization, but we are also very, very firm and keen on trying to, bridge the gap in the general understanding of technology and the political implications that it has for society. And one of the things that we see more and more is a common misconception that is the algorithms, as if it would be a living thing. And this is actually something that people that are using them have a quite vested interest in, of trying to make it look like it would be living things of their own, whereas what we need to understand and still remind time and again is that any algorithm, any piece of software, any collection of data is still and will be for quite some time a manifestation of a human will, a human intention. It is a goal that is behind it. And this is something that we shouldn't forget. I found the talk about the predictive policing very interesting in the sense that there was not once a statement on what the optimization goals are. So the optimization goals are the most important subject that we need to talk about as in society, because we are getting the tools to at least get the feeling that we may reach them. So we may actually have success in some of these areas. So predicting where the next crime wave will be, or optimizing where the helicopters are being sent. This is harmless stuff. I mean, this is not really what we need to worry about. The more interesting stuff is what's happening in the Netherlands here for many years. It's something called Project Gegenwirken, which is before, or in case the criminal cannot really be prosecuted, he still can be made subject to harassment by the government by algorithms. So people that are subject to Project Gegenwirken are not getting due process. What they are getting is more health inspections, more building code inspections, more tax inspections. They are actually harassed by the algorithms that are, or by using the algorithms that are meant to be randomly assigning more checks, more in-depth inspections based on data. So I mean, if you look at, for instance, at the tax office, so why do we think you get a tax check, in-depth tax check? So it's not random. So of course, there's something in the database that looks at what your patterns are. And then you get them. And they say, okay, maybe that's good because it released the tax code office people from manually looking through your data. On the other hand, it gives you a tremendous amount of power. If you can influence this type of behavior of the government, that should be neutral, that should be basically not looking into individual cases, but just trying to keep things in average and balance, then this power is unchecked. And this is one of the big dangers that we need to understand. Digitization means that you actually can individualize. So what we've been talking before here about is mostly stuff that is averaging on groups of people, like the people who have the measles or the flu or whatever, or people that are more likely to suffer crime because they live in a certain area. But digitization, and especially the ubiquitous sensors and data traces that they leave, that we are facing now with the Internet of Things and ubiquitous mobile phones and so on, means that prediction will become individualized. So, and this is then getting really interesting, because the next step in all of this, where we have not talked about yet, is what we call nudging. Nudging is, let's say we have an assumption of what good behavior is, what the people who are actually having these tools think how everybody should behave, eating healthy, not smoking, sleeping enough, not committing crimes, not jaywalking, not driving bicycles that don't have a light, not picking your nose in public. So you see that there's as you did with your where is the border on what police should be using, what we need to talk about is actually what are actually the limits that the government and corporations should be able to influence in everybody's life. And as we all know, a society that tries to strive for crime-free behavior of everyone is the police state. So, because of course we're all committing minor offenses every day, so otherwise society wouldn't work. If you try to weed that out by having ubiquitous sensors, plus predictive policing, plus automatic prosecution, think radar traps. Radar traps are nothing more than automatic prosecution, and we can do many more of that. So technology-wise, it's trivially easy. So the question is just, do we want it? And if you look at, for instance, the subject of nudging. So nudging is basically influencing behavior into the right direction. So if we would have nudging 15 years ago, if that would be available already then, we would be all eating tremendous amounts of spinach. Because 15 years ago, we thought that's really good for your health. There's lots of iron in there. Science says that. So the problem is just that science was very wrong on that because there was a calculation error and the spinach is not really doing anything tremendously for your health. Some people think it tastes good, but that's one of the things where we should be very aware of, that what we currently think that there is a causal relationship or even a strong correlation that we may need to use to influence people's behavior, to steer them away from crime or to assign resources, this may as well be very spurious. I mean, funny correlations, there's a complete site for that has hundreds of these diagrams, so correlation between Miss America and murder rate stuff. So there are hundreds of them. And what we need to understand is that this is the point in time where we as a society need to decide on our optimization goals. And if we really want to use these digital tools that we are developing now to actually influence and impact individual people's behavior. And I think not. I think it is a digital human right, and we need to write those new human rights, that we are not to be subject to algorithm-driven discrimination. I mean, in the end, I'm not really caring what technology are you using to discriminate against me. So if you're using technology to discriminate against me, I'm not really caring if it's a database, machine learning, or whatever. I don't want to be discriminated against. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank Rieger. Let's just continue and speak afterwards. Let me give the floor to Egge van der Poel. He's a clinical data scientist at the Erasmus Medical Center. Before that, he worked at KPMG, and he will have a short talk on predictive analytics in healthcare. So please, a warm welcome.
Yeah, I'm here. Well, thank you for being here. I did a slight forecast when I saw the time schedule that I would be introduced a little bit late, so I will make my talk a little bit shorter so we have more time for discussion, because I think there will be an interesting discussion. I will just mention why I'm doing data science, data analytics, because that's what they call it now. It's nothing new. I agree with that. But why I'm doing that, particularly in healthcare. Let me start with a question. Who of you has children? Yeah, I think that's about the right representation I would have guessed for this age group. I have a young son, Abe. He's turning 1 in 2 days. So about this time last year, I was amazingly nervous for the upcoming birth. And I was nervous because I don't know nothing about a birth or life and death, because I'm a physicist. I know about formulas. I don't know about people. So I was very happy to learn about this algorithm, the Apgar score. You know that? That's where they sort of say there are 5 characteristics to look at when a baby is just born. Look at those 5 characteristics. For instance, does he tense his muscles, and what is the color of his skin? And then give it a number, 0, 1, or 2. Add up the 5 scores, so it's a number between 0 and 10. If it's 7 or higher, the baby is completely healthy. Between 4, 5, 6, then it's still okay. But 3 or lower, immediately medical care. For me, it was nice to have this tool in hand to assess the health of my to-be-born son. Because when I look at my wife, I can see if everything is fine, but if I look at a just-born baby, I would not have any way. But luckily they score it, and this Apgar score, developed in the 1950s of the last century, is actually just an algorithm. And what type of algorithm is it? It's a decision support algorithm, right? Because it tells you, if this happens, do that. If this happens, do that. But it's still the medical personnel that makes the decision to do it. So that brings me back to the discussion of today. I mean, he was totally fine and he's still doing fine. I heard a lot of interesting presentations about data analysis and how to do forecasting and so on and so forth. And I speak to a lot of medical professionals about using data and in their daily practice. And what most medical professionals feel when somebody talks to them about data-driven analysis, data-driven hospitals, they feel, well, on their back heels, and they say, whoa, we're not going to be data-driven. I want to have evidence, that's fine. I want to have the best evidence at the right time to support my decision-making. But I want it really just as input. And that's what I heard also in the previous talks. You need to have the human touch there still to provide the context to be able to make the best decisions at the right time. And for this human, it's also important to realize that there's bias in his or her own thinking as well. And if we get that going in the correct way, then I think we can make healthcare more personal and precise. And there's one thing that I would like to discuss with you and also with the other people in the discussion coming up. I mean, for me personally, if I have an illness, I had some knee injury in the past, I would go to the doctor and say, okay, given this knee injury and my age and the things that I desire in the future, what would you recommend? What did people like me do and what was their outcome? That for me is kind of a safe forecast, right? You have something and then someone says, okay, given your situation, this and this could happen with this and this probabilities. What feels more unheimisch, so to say, is if someone says, okay, given your situation now, the probability that you will die in the next 3 years is such and such. Do you feel the difference? There's a difference between if you have something already, what can we do to make it better? And the probability, giving a forecast about you getting something, getting a treatment, getting an illness or getting a sickness or going to die. For me, those are two different things where forecasting has either a positive feeling for me or a negative feeling. And I would like to discuss with you how you feel about that. So I would like to leave it at that to give room for discussion. Okay?
Thanks. Can all the speakers come to the front? And let's just start with your last question, because I might think that the rest of the guests also have something interesting to say about that. So perhaps you want to kick off with that? Yeah, microphone's in front of you.
Are we there, yeah?
So sort of positive forecasts and forecasts in a perhaps
well,
more
I
criminalizing
strongly
way.
agree on the point of the human influence in the decision-making process that obviously, from my point of view, should not be neglected. But another point that I would like to make is that the human decision-making is also crafted from experiences that the humans were exposed to in their past. So one good thing that has not been stressed out yet is that if we can create models, not just from the knowledge of people, but from data that is gathered, is that we can gather much more data than a human is probably ever able to encounter in his or her own life. So if we are then to make generalizations or assumptions for our knowledge algorithms, decision support systems or whatever, within this data, the experiences from many people can be caught. So where do we rely on then becomes a thing, right? If we have data that covers the opinions of all of you guys and compare that to the data that is just being produced by one person, well, there starts to be a slippery slope there. So that is just what I wanted to add here.
Perhaps you can say something about the complexity that would be incorporated in that.
Yeah, I think one thing that we really need to keep in mind is with predictive analytics, you can't have one without the other. And what I mean by that is when you drive the algorithm, it's up to the person doing the analysis to determine what use that algorithm has. So in the same way that you can input data to determine based on your age, height, and a knee injury, and you have that decisional framework, is the same algorithm that can tell a hospital, well, this person lives in poverty, they won't be able to pay their bills, so it's not probable that they'll be able to pay their medical bills, so we will deny or decrease service. They're the same analytics. And so just let me finish. So I think it's important, and I think that's what drives us into an interesting space right now, is the same analytics that benefit us are the same ones that are discriminating against us. And they're becoming, I agree with the gentleman here, they're becoming very individualized in individual cases. So whereas you may be able to have a decision to the treatment that you get, there's no guarantee based on that same data in that same facility that the person behind you will even get treated based on other determining sort of factors. So I think that's, for me, is a very important nuance to keep in mind.
I mean, the critical point there is that we need to talk about what are the ethical borders and boundaries that we give ourselves. I mean, we could, with the technology that we have and the data that we gather, we could build a perfect dystopian society. So where basically everybody is having an invisible leash around his neck. So some say we are already on the way to that. And and we need to be very aware of that this is basically a decision that we need to make collectively, is what we want to have in the end. So if we want to actually use the data for the good of mankind or the good of society and everybody, or if it is, for instance, a decision as it's currently drifting towards, saying, okay, that's mostly for making more profit. I mean, we are all giving this data. So in the German data protection law, we have this clause saying, okay, you need to be specific about what this data is being used for. This is generally being now considered to be out-fashioned, saying, okay, big data is all about, or big data analytics is all about using data that's already there for different purposes. But in the end, this clause has a very profound meaning, because it says we want to know and discuss before what this data is actually being used for. So we want to know and discuss before what you're going to be doing with that. And if you want to move away from that, then we need to be very explicit about what are the outcomes of our analytics. What is the optimization goals that we are putting down towards these machines, saying, okay, this is what I want to have. Do I want to utilize the nurses in the hospital more efficiently, meaning that they have even less time to drink a coffee and just breath? Or do we want to reduce the number of fatalities in that hospital? Or do we want to increase profitability of that hospital? This is all within the realm of the possibilities. And without discussing these goals openly and saying we evaluate the outcome of these analytics and the outcomes of what we're doing there against the openly stated goals, we are running the profound risk of these goals being hidden, so hidden agendas being followed by the people who actually have the power and the tools. And this is also applying to police work as well. I mean, if your goal is reducing the number of overtime hours that you have in police officers and you're not stating that, but doing then something with the data to deploy these officers in a way that they have a shorter path to home, for instance, just making case up, then that means that you probably have the same time of police officers on the street, but you're probably reducing public service on that. So, I mean, this is the one thing that I'm missing from this discussion, is that we need to be open about the goals and the outcomes.
Rutger, can you perhaps respond on that, or perhaps even you?
No, I highly agree with you. The goal for the police is, of course, to make a safer and nicer society here. Like I said, the police wants to be your brother rather than your opponent. So that is our first assumption here, where we depart from, right? So we want to reduce crime. That is our main goal, and I think we're very clear about it. But
can, for instance, a police force be transparent about the way that they want to utilize these algorithms. I mean, for crime prediction, it might be difficult because then everyone knows the
exactly
behind it.
There's always a race going on.
But if it's a sort of a business strategy in terms of minimizing costs, that's something different. So
but I think it's I hear the sort of main point you're driving towards. Obviously, there needs to be some sort of optimization framework. But again, I think we take for granted that just because we don't choose to use the power in the algorithm doesn't mean that power is still not there. It's still accessible. It's still usable. And even if we were we were to drive towards an equitable sort of outcome or equitable rule base of what this algorithm is supposed to do, I mean, we've been doing that since civilized society, haven't we, in certain ways or another. Really what we need to, in my view, what we need to recognize is the fact that we can't just circumvent the potential. We can't just come up with a rule, a generalized rule that says this is the framework in which this technology will be used. And in a way, in a certain sense...
Why not?
Because it's the way the analytics work. The same analytics that the Pentagon uses are the same analytics that Facebook uses, are the same analytics that the police force uses, are the same analytics that the community service organization uses. So you have all these disparate interests in these technologies. So even if you came up with a centralized framework, and when I say the same, I mean very collectively.
What I'm talking about is not a framework, but I'm saying is societal acceptable use. I mean, if I have a CNC milling machine, so
Right.
I can make a prosthesis for a child, or I can make a machine gun with the same machine.
Right.
So
But-
the
but-
use of the technology has different criminal implications.
But I get very suspicious of that term. I mean, I live in London right now, and the current political party right now uses that logic all the time. This is acceptable use of this policy. They say it all the time.
Maybe I can add a little to
Acceptable use is only beneficial to the person creating the acceptability.
Yeah, sure, of course. I mean that's what.
So who creates that's the I think that's
Yeah,
the nuance I'm going to, because it's really just a centralization of power. Like, who creates the acceptable?
No, I mean, the acceptable means for me very fundamental things. This is essentially boiling down to human rights, to the right not being discriminated, to the right not being treated as something special in a negative way. I mean, we have the European Digital Charter for Human Rights, which the UK didn't subscribe to, by the way. And so there are rules that we already have. And the problem is that the violations that we're currently seeing are mostly happening in two areas. One is in areas where lots of profits is to be made, and the other is in the area of the security state, where people are having their goals and their outlook on what a safe and secure society is, and then they end up with basically saying, okay, if you're behaving a little bit suspiciously, like renting spaces in shady areas and wanting to grow tomatoes there, then it's your fault. So you need to so if you do that, then you just get a rate. Sorry, that's how things are. Yeah, or you happen to be a black young male in the middle of London. Sorry, that's how things are. You're getting frisked and searched. So and this is something that I don't want to. And this is something where I think fundamental human rights are the right way to treat that, and saying, okay, regardless of what you do, so these are my rights, and you don't get to violate them just because you can do no more efficiently, which essentially is what you're saying with the analytics is.
No, not at all. I'm not saying it at all.
I mean, what analytics can do is you can violate my rights no more efficiently.
No, what I'm saying is there are two spaces. I'll say it quick because I've talked too much. But there are two spaces. There's the application, which is the algorithm, and there's the logic. They're two different spaces, and they live in the same moment. It's not just what I'm talking about. I'm actually advocating for humanizing the algorithm. So we're actually closer than you would say there. But we can't ignore the fact that the algorithm itself functions as its own logic. It has its own reason. It can't think. An algorithm can't think.
But I think we can still regulate it some way. I mean, our officers also wear guns, right? So they can use it. All the time, but they need to apply certain ways of conduct, right? And they can't shoot everybody, of course.
In this country,
no, they won't.
No, but
the same goes for working with algorithms here.
As an American, I would disagree with that.
Yeah. Well, look, you should come over. We live here. But the point I want to make is that the logic that is resides within the algorithms can also be steered, right, and controlled in a way that I'm absolutely against feeding all the data into the algorithms, for instance, right? So we should be very much aware that we do not enter aspects concerning race, sexuality, religion, and aspects that are, well, you know, very, that should be treated very carefully into these algorithms. We don't want that, but there are many other features that we can apply within these algorithms that are more accepted and can still provide us with solutions in order to reach our goals that we are after, providing a safer society.
I think also the point that sort of, I get the feeling here that when you speak about, for instance, guns that the police can wear and can use, I can even imagine that in some countries, for instance, Ireland, they cannot use the guns. But that's also a decision of the population, of the electorate. I can imagine that for something like algorithmic use in such a thing, it's a difficult thing to sort of pose to a general public. Is this what we can use, and when can we use it, and which factors should be in, which factors should be out? So I think it's a much more complex scenario.
Yeah. So there's one experiment I want to bring up here. That's about the New Deal on Data from MIT. That's setting up a community where the citizens themselves control who gets access to their data and where they can use the data from, and at any time can extract their data from the experiment. So it's a social structure. It's the whole, let's say, village cooperates until the moment that each citizen says it's enough. That's kind of an idealistic way of thinking of how this could be. So that's about data ownership. That the ownership is with the citizen, and he or she controls who has access at what time and for what purpose. So then you come to, okay, the goal of the use of the data should be stated clearly and should be really transparent if those goals are reached, and if they change their goal, then the citizen again have some kind of data referendum or so. You can still go on and let me see how you progress. So I think that's interesting for you to look into. But I'm also very interested in, let's say, how do you feel about this? I mean, we're talking about data from the people. We are the people, but you are also the people. I don't hear anybody booing or applauding, so I have no idea what you feel about this, actually. Anyone want to comment on that, please?
Shares, yeah.
One thing that has been touched upon a little bit, but one of the problems that I have with predictive analytics is that you're always part of a group, and who determines which group I'm part of. I used to drive an Audi up until a year ago. Most hold-ups are committed by people driving Audis nowadays, so I'm in that group. I don't want to be in that group. I'm male. Most crimes are committed by males. So who determines these groups, and how you used the word individualized? I think in a negative, maybe it was in a different context. If predictive analytics are being applied, by God, let it be individualized, so at least I will be made accountable for my own actions and not for the actions of a presumed group that I'm part of.
I think that's why I did the talk about the maths, because it's not possible, because the whole foundation of how the analytics even work by grouping. It's not possible to actually individualize only to the level that you belong in, like you say, Audi drivers or a certain gender. So first, if an analytics has been used on you, it's already not possible for you not to be generalized into a certain category. The good part, I think the really optimistic part, is the algorithm doesn't think, it's not a living being, you know what you're saying, which means it only can pattern your previous and present behavior to predict the future. So if you decide to change your present behavior and buy a Ford tomorrow, it gets confused, it will catch up very quickly, but you have a very small window of a moment of individual power to actually use that data to circumvent and do something else. Now, it will capture it back. I mean, data is kind of like capitalism. It'll always come back and capture you. But you have a moment where you can sort of make a different decisional type of framework.
I saw a remark over there.
Well, I see two basic problems, and it's striking me that you didn't address it until now. First is, I think most of us would agree that we should have basic human rights in the digital era, right? And you said, well, we have possibilities to regulate algorithms, the use of analytics and stuff. First of all, I think there's a fundamental problem in really understanding those neural networks, because they have self-learning abilities. They get, in a technical sense, really complex, so that you, as a normal person who's not into tech or something, or studies computer science, will really have problems understanding what's going on. And that's just a growing problem in the future. We're talking about the future here, right? That's first. We have same problems, like, reminds me on a really large discussion we have in Germany about voting computers. And as the Constitutional Court said, we just can have voting computers if a non-technical person can understand what is really happening in the computer. We have the same with algorithms, I guess, first. Second is, and it's really interesting to see, we should understand that all those colossal data, big data nonsense is a economic-driven industry, like the predictive policing thing. It's, of course, it's a market. They sell it to police. We have it in Germany and all the other countries, of course. It's not happening upon us, but it's a market. You see it, of course, in the Google and Facebook case, but it's also in most areas where, especially health industry, I tell you, where it's economy-driven, it's monetary, it's nothing else. And that's really hard to apply basic human rights against, let's face it, a capitalistic system, which we have, which we live in, of course. And so these problems tend to grow in the future, both the transparency thing, which is basic to, if you want to regulate, and the economic-driven means for big data. And both should be addressed, I guess, and I would really love to hear your opinions.
Yeah, I agree with your worries. I see them as well in healthcare, as you see them, the economic-driven forces. My question is, my hope is that there will be a revolution from the bottom up, that we will, as individual citizens, come up for our rights, our data rights, and so on and so forth. But I hear from the laughter that I'm alone in this.
No. I will be with you, of course, but well, the chances are maybe not that high.
Really?
For the revolution, I mean.
I think there's more and more awareness of data abuse by companies. There's more and more, let's say, tension about companies not using their data for wrong purposes, or just abusing your information, and you don't see any reward and they get rich overnight. And especially in healthcare, there's now, I think, a tendency for patients to come with their own data to the doctor, to say, listen up, I've been measuring myself, I've been seeing this. I mean, doctors say, yeah, man, it's really bugging. People come with all kinds of Google pages and with their own Fitbits, and I say, yeah, deal with it. I mean, that's it. People come with their information, and you're supposed to guide them in their next steps. You're in this with them. You're not the big oracle from Delphi saying, go left. So I think we're getting there small steps at a time, but that's also why I asked the question, and I think a lot of the discussion is as this underlying. There's some kind of feeling within us that if you use the techniques that are, I agree, similar in various fields, if you use these techniques for one thing, it feels good. If you use it for another, it doesn't feel good. How to deal with that as a society is something that we all need to think about. And yeah, I have hope that we will get there.
Okay, 2 last questions.
Yeah. Can I comment just real quick on the ethical thing?
Yeah.
Just really quick. I think concerning your ethical, because you're really talking about sort of a level of ethics and human rights. And one of the I think the positive things is we're starting to have these conversations, because the major ethical debates on big data right now are happening on a species level. So all the debates are happening on, will robots kill humans? Like, at this pace, we'll kill each other before robots will. So we've circumvented the whole topic. So because those, and the reason why I say that is exactly what you're pointing to, is these ethical issues that don't address our common human problems and how the algorithms and data are interacting with those problems are not being talked about. Only thing that's being talked about is a species level annihilation with data. So the first step is to start having these conversations. The second step is the examples of ethics that have been done. Example, Google's DeepMind. Part of their acquisition by Google was that their machine learning algorithms couldn't be used for automated weaponry. Okay, but that's one example, but as you say, it's already within an economic framework. It's already captured within economics. So I don't think there's a clean answer between human rights, ethics, data, and capital. I think it starts, with an event like this today, where we can start having conversations that, trust me, these conversations are not happening.
Sure, questions or?
Some sort of like statements rather than questions, but the first thing, she mentioned that data analytics is something that's economic driven. I'm sorry, the world is economic driven, so we have to switch somehow because now we are finding now a new villain, that's data analytics, and we're just trying to put our concerns into it, but the problem is structures of power that we have. And let me just go a little bit forward. When Mr. Rieger mentioned the government doing some surveillance on the tax, for instance, I'm sorry, the government has the duty to surveilling people's bank accounts to a certain amount, of course. There's a magic number, which is 10,000, if you move between accounts, which triggers. There's a duty, because tax is bad. I think everyone agrees that tax evasion is something that goes beyond our deepest values. Is there anyone here that disagrees with it? I don't think so. So I think we have to, I would like to see if you could, another thing I would like to say is that the moment we are born, we start using data that we collected to make power decisions. So that's a mirror of ourselves. So instead of, I'd just like to, how do you feel that? How do you see that? Because it's usually, we blame capitalism all the time about things, but how much of this, that's a question I want to pose in the end, how much of this control things, and of course, some of these are evil, some of these are good, how much of these reflect ourselves? Because, let me just give a final example. If you see your child, you mentioned a child, I think everybody fell off a staircase once in their childhood. And if you're a parent and you know your child can break his neck falling off a staircase, you just go with the power to your kid and say, no, don't go near the staircase. Or you buy a small. So I'd like to see how can you see that and reflect of man himself. And how do, when do you think, if it's money, I'll agree with you, of course, but there are other similarities that you see between these power structures and our very existences as citizens and in our everyday life?
Okay, so the man who...
I would like to respond directly. So I'm not against the government collecting taxes. What I'm against is that the government, with the advent of data-driven control, in the sense that you getting harassed when you don't do things the government likes, and the government hides behind saying, okay, yeah, the algorithm selected you the 5th year in a row for in-depth tax inspection, so which is harassment. So this is what I'm talking about, and this is actually what's happening here in the Netherlands, called Project Gegenwerken. So the thing is that by hiding behind the algorithms, by hiding behind the algorithm says, actually power is executed as unchecked. And what we're talking about here in terms of data is always power. So data is power. If I have more data about you, I'm having more power about you. And so that what we need to talk about is the power relationships that are behind it. And what we currently see is that there's a tremendous concentration of power. So all the checks and balances that have been built into society for both keeping the security apparatus in check and for keeping capitalist corporations, mega corporations in check, have been circumvented. So they all are basically null and void as it is currently now. So, and this is what we need to talk about. This is what we need to act against as a society, that basically we are going forward into something that will be amount to neo-feudalism if we don't do something against it.
Okay, thanks. I think we need to wrap this up right now. Thanks for all the speakers. Really valuable insights, and thanks for you for coming here. And I think Arjan still has something to say.
Yeah, please a warm applause for the panelists.